1, 2, 3, 4.
So thanks for downloading Scuba Confidential. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, we're back.
So it's me, Marcus, and with me are the two legendary characters, the King of Bungay, Ian,
Hello.
and the Hevingham Duchess, Louise.
Hello.
We're back in, and actually we're recording this as we record this. It's bank holiday weekend here in the UK, which means for normal working folk, you get a long weekend, which is always nice. And in fact, the weather over here is scorchio at the moment, so it's shorts and flip-flops weather. It's suddenly gone from winter to summer. And it's funny, actually, because we had a message from Ed Smith, who's one of our listeners in Spain, and he's posted and said, have a good one. Looks like you've got good weather for Easter weekend. It's raining in Spain. Oh, no. So I'm trying to feel some sympathy for Ed.
Isn't it meant to rain on the plane in Spain?
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
So he's going to type then as par for the course, Ed. I don't know what the problem is. No, but we've got really nice weather here, and we're cooped up inside doing this, and that's how committed we are. This is public service broadcasting at its best here. We're in just having a chat about some diving issues as usual. This week, Lou wants to say something.
I was going to say, Ian hasn't got his bunny ears on, I'm afraid.
Not today. No.
Not today.
Very disappointed.
It's odd because normally he does on a Saturday.
Well, only on special occasions, for special moments.
Yeah, we've heard about them. So on this episode, this week's episode, we're going to address a question from one of our patrons. We've got Lou with some news on cave rescues and some positive news for fish for a change. And we're going to talk about a subject that was actually voted for by the listeners on the Patreon page. So off the back of episode 16, and if you haven't heard it, you can go and download it. We, during that episode, had the legend that is Jim Marshall on talking about his instructor training in the IDC. And we had a question from one of our patrons off the back of that episode, a guy called Paul Yannig. I'm sorry, Paul, if we've mispronounced that for you. And you're based in Seattle, Washington. And he's written in and said, why did you become dive instructors or dive masters? It's one of those questions I get from students, and I'm always curious about other dive pros and why they decided to go to that level.
It's a really good question.
Yeah. So why? You guys may as well start.
I'd not really thought about it too much until I went on my rescue course. And that was the first time that really struck home, and I thought about it. I arrived for my rescue course and really enjoyed it. Rescue course, really good course to do, really worthwhile. And that was the first time as a diver for me. I'd actually, you get that train of thought of actually, for not thinking about just yourself, you're thinking about other people.
Yeah.
I'd seen these other people in the water who were pretending to be dead bodies and things like that for us to pull in, or unconscious divers, and got talking to a couple of guys who I hadn't met before, and they had explained they were actual dive masters, and I hadn't heard this phrase before. I'd started asking them questions. What is it actually to be a dive master? They started explaining to me about, what's what, and I thought, well, actually, that rolled, like the sound of that. And I really do enjoy learning as well. The podcast is education every time we do it.
Well, yeah.
All these words and stuff like that, So it's right up my street. And one of the major things I took away from the rescue course, I thought, actually, this is going to be maybe something I want to aspire to.
Yeah. What about you, Lou?
Well, I always thought that I wasn't really confident enough or good enough really to be a dive master until a particular weekend. This was back in, crikey, it must have been 10 years ago now, and I was pleasure diving at Stony Cove in the UK, and I was buddied with a lady. She was a bit older, so in her 50s or 60s I think, and she wasn't very confident at all, not very confident in the water in general, and I think she just passed her open water course, and we decided to go pleasure diving. And she was so nervous she could barely get about a metre underwater without coming back up to the surface, and she was virtually hyperventilating. And I kind of gave her all the advice that I had, really tried to calm her down. And we must have spent at least half an hour on the surface, just, we don't have to go diving now. We can bail out, go and get a coffee, come back. And fair play to her, she really persevered and really kind of, she was determined. And David, the bear, was kind of watching. He was teaching at the time, but he could kind of see what was going on. And he said afterwards, I thought you handled that really well compared to how you were, no disrespect to how you were a few years ago. How you handled that situation was quite kind of commendable, which was really nice to hear as an individual. And it got me thinking, maybe with a bit of work and a bit of extra practice, I could maybe be a dive master.
Yeah.
I really put the work in. And I think for me, it's sharing that knowledge, sharing the experience of diving with somebody, and seeing their smile on their face once they've completed their first try dive or, their first confined water diving session in the pool. And it's sharing knowledge and experience, which is, for me, the best part.
Yeah. I was involved with a big proportion of your dive master training, as David and yourself sort of had approached me.
You poor thing.
Yeah, worked out all right. I think that was in part to avoid any marital disputes between the two of you.
Yeah.
But it seemed to work out all right, and you've both gone on to become well-known dive masters in the area. So for me, how I got into it was kind of again by a bit of a happy accident. Really, I'd always wanted to learn to dive. I did a try dive in the 90s and really enjoyed it. And then I had a sort of change of personal circumstance, shall we put it that way, and came back to it, did an open water course, thoroughly enjoyed it, went on a trip abroad where it's one of those trips where, to see some of these dive sites, you'd need to be an advanced diver because of the depths and the kind of challenges that are involved. So, okay, I'll do my advanced. And then Chris, who's one of the instructors who we both know, sort of approached me and said, I think you're onto something here. Would you like to do your rescue diver course? And it was every step of the way. It was sort of by happy accident, really, and just a side effect of gathering experience and knowledge and just wanting to get involved, having that keenness to get involved. And it just led me down that path, almost without me considering it in too much detail, to the point of becoming an instructor and leading me to work around the world for a decade in different places. So I'm pleased I did it, but it sort of happened by accident in a lot of ways. Yeah. Ian?
It's amazing how diving can lead to different things and lead you down different avenues in life. Like, for you, you from that, you went to work and around the world, leading different dive boats and things like that. And you don't see these things coming sometimes.
No.
And it is by chance meeting somebody or you go onto a course. And I can think of people that we've had as students in the last few years who've come to us as open water students. And then within a couple of years, they're doing the same things as you. They're working their way around different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing opportunities.
Yeah.
And also friendships as well, that's come from diving.
Exactly.
It's all good.
Exactly right. I think we talked about this with Jim on the previous episode, where we had this sudden realisation that the four of us sat around the table in the studio here, probably without diving, our paths wouldn't have crossed in life, because we live and work in kind of, in terms of our day jobs, pre-diving in different areas, So that's just kind of testament to that. But for me, like you guys, it was a trickle-down thing with becoming an instructor or a dive master all those years ago. You do meet those students who are in the, you're doing an open water course or a try dive, and they're telling you proudly that they're going to be a dive master at day one, which is, let's walk before we can run, I think, on that one. But I think for a lot of people, it happens as it happened for us. And it's nice to, as Lou said, to share those kind of things. So that was Paul's question. That was Paul's question from Seattle, Washington, home of Nirvana.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're big fans of. That's pretty much it, really.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paul. I think we're going to move on now. It's time for our usual feature. It's Louise with the news.
So a cave diver who played a crucial role in last year's cave rescue in Thailand has himself had to be rescued after becoming separated and trapped in a US cave for 28 hours. Josh Bratchley entered the 120-metre long Mill Pond Cave in Jackson County, Tennessee, alongside 4 other divers in order to repair a broken guideline. However, he soon became separated from the line and the rest of the group due to poor visibility. So it's a notoriously silty cave, this particular system. And the divers only realised he was gone when they emerged from the cave some time later. And despite returning to the cave to try and find the missing diver, they were unsuccessful. Now, as well as being notoriously silty, this particular cave also features tight passages, sharp angled turns, and at this time of year it has a water temperature of around 13 degrees C. And this led the remaining divers to fear that Josh Brackley had maybe have become hypothermic, which would have obviously hindered his ability to exit the cave safely. Regional coordinator for the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team, it's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ed Sorensen was flown in from Florida to assist with the rescue, along with other divers, and Brackley was soon located by a pair in an air pocket, and apparently the air pocket would have had enough air to last around a day. So they really got there just in time, really.
Yeah, nick of time.
Yeah, and that's only a guesstimate, I think, in terms of how much air he would have had. Speaking to reporters after the rescue, Brackley claimed that he had tried to find his own way out of the cave 3 times, but then took the decision to conserve his remaining air in the hope that rescuers would actually reach him, which they did. The actual operation itself took around an hour, and amazingly, Brackley declined offers of medical assistance upon emerging from the cave.
Yeah.
And his first request was for some pizza.
Oh.
So he's a guy after my own heart.
Yeah, there's a British diver for you.
Don't want any of that medical business. Let's just have the
We haven't
pizza.
got
Give
time
me the
for,
pizza.
Yeah, no time for that jibber jabber. There's
brilliant.
nothing to bother matron about. Let's get on with it. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. I was actually just doing a bit of research on Ed just to find out a little bit more about him because he seems like a really interesting character in the diving world. I dare say actually a bit of a James Bond character.
Oh, really?
Of the diving world. Really interesting.
Yeah, what do you know about him, Ian?
Yeah, so if I can just sort of mention that Ed Sorensen is a technical diver known for numerous rescues of lost or trapped divers in the underwater caves of Florida, particularly in Vortex Spring and Blue Spring State Park. Began diving in 1996. Within a few years, he expanded to cave diving. In 1999, he joined the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery, as Louise just mentioned, as one of the original members, and later founded Cave Adventures in Marina, Florida. Became a local hero in 2012 after 4 rescues that year. Was involved in other near misses and rescues. Due to his experience with the Vortex Spring cave system, was involved in the 2010 search for a missing diver.
I mean, there's a couple of things. As I looked at this and you've just told me about this Ed Sorensen chap, occurred to me. Firstly, Josh Brackley, who was involved in this incident, he was obviously clearly an experienced cave diver, and it just goes to prove that things can go wrong. However skilled and experienced you are, there's always stuff to learn and contingencies, and he clearly had his wits about him to find that air pocket and to find some means of extending his period he could maintain himself in that cave system. So it's all credit to him, really, for having that presence of mind. And the second thing is, when you told me about Ed Sorensen, in my mind, all I could picture is like, this guy's the fixer of diving. He's coming in like Winston Wolfe in Pulp Fiction and just turning up. It's like, okay, tell me the situation. Let's go sort it out. So I've just got this mental image of him arriving in a Honda NSX with a suit and tie on now, like Harvey Keitel.
The Dan Network awarded him in 2012 the Heroic Merit Awards, and also got the Instructor Trainer Award in 2013. So he's done really well.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to all concerned on that.
He's rescued 2 people already this year, before this one.
Yeah, he's obviously a very, very experienced and skillful diver and does a lot of good work helping people. That's fantastic.
He's probably got a number you want to have on your mobile just in case you ever get in trouble.
Yeah, have it on speed dial in your dry suit pocket.
Get caught out in Bungie, and then know to call.
As well as a pizza delivery service.
Yeah. Excellent. So what else you got, Lou?
Well, coral reefs that suffer from coral bleaching can still be productive, a new study has claimed.
Right.
So we all know that coral reefs all around the world are under threat, and a big part of that threat is from the bleaching of coral. However, Renato Murray from the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University led a study into how reef fish get the majority of their food via the flow of currents. So not the raisins or sultanas, we're talking currents in, using high-resolution surveys and individual biomass production estimates, the team created a map which indicates where the energy comes from for all coral fish on a coral reef. Now, they already knew that coral reef fish relied on food drifting in from the sea, such as plankton, but what they didn't realise was how important this was for fish communities. The team looked at everything from gobies to coral trout and large jacks and assessed more than 18,000 fish from over 300 species. And eventually they found that various transport mechanisms like currents and tides interact with the reef and bring in vast amounts of plankton. And according to the study, for every kilogram of fish produced on the reef, more than 400 grams are dependent on food that comes from the open ocean, not the actual reef itself. So it's really, really fascinating stuff. The study concluded that for many reefs, the food from the open ocean can help sustain fish populations, even though the coral reef itself might be badly damaged from coral bleaching. And it's actually the first time that they've been able to put all species into perspective. And it's really hoped that the study itself will basically, ensure that reefs can be productive to a degree. Obviously, coral bleaching is still a massive problem.
Absolutely.
But it's heartening to know that fish on these particular reefs that are being damaged can still access food and energy sources from the open ocean.
Well, that's kind of reassuring in a way. You said that 400 grams of every kilo, 40% essentially is dependent on open ocean movement of waters and plankton. Because global warming and climate change is a massive thing for coral reefs. I can remember probably we're coming up for nearly 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, something like that, being in Thailand after El Nino, which is something we can link to on the social media, had taken effect, and we'd had this rush of warm water come through. And seeing the coral bleaching is two things. It's heartbreaking. And secondly, it's a bit like a tornado going through the homes of people in Florida or something like that, where you kind of feel this enormous sadness for the fish populations there. So to know that a larger proportion than expected of their food, of what sustains them, comes from open ocean is really positive.
I think it shows that as well, on a good point, that there's plenty of food out there in the sea, and that the sea's still productive, which is good, because you do hear a lot of bad things, obviously, being highlighted about our oceans and stuff with plastic and other stuff. But it's nice to hear that the sea is actually still good and still producing food and stuff like that to keep these corals going.
Yeah. I think it'd be nice to think that if we can, as a species, make some changes, that the ocean will be able to recover reasonably quickly from some of the damage that's happened. And it's nice, just separately to that, to have two really positive news stories where there's been a nice outcome and a nice result.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, I think even though it's really good news and it's an interesting study in itself, it really highlights why we need to make more of an effort to look after the planet as a whole. And also the fact that, they're getting their food sources from the open ocean. Obviously, the ocean is under attack from pollution and plastic and various other things. So we really need to kind of not be complacent. So it's good news. It's, by no means we can take our foot off the gas in terms of making an effort and just doing little things, little changes to make a bigger difference.
Absolutely.
We like good news.
We do.
We do. Actually, just separate to this, I wouldn't mind... I don't know if Samantha's listening. She's probably somewhere the other part of the world. I'd be interested to know what Samantha's opinion is on this particular subject, because this ties in with some of her research. On an earlier episode for listeners who are new to us, we had Samantha Jane Howlett on, who's a research scientist based out in the Pacific, and she specifically researches how climate change affects reef fish, and this ties in almost directly with this, so it'd be nice.
Episode 10, I believe.
Episode 10, well done, Ian. What memory man from Bungie at the mic there.
I'll lay down now.
Yeah, he's looking quite flustered after all that, listeners. Right, is that it for the news?
That is the news.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for all that. I think we're going to move on now to the main topic of discussion for this episode. On the last episode, we had the legendary Jim Marshall on the podcast, who actually wrote on the Patreon page that he thinks it was the best episode ever. I don't know why he would think. I don't know why he would think that. No,
Nothing like blowing your own trumpet.
well, careful. But it was very modest of Jim to say that. But if you haven't heard it, go back and have a listen to that. But within that episode, we were talking about his experience as a new instructor going through the instructor training. And we were talking about professional level diving and these kind of things. Off the back of that, we put a poll on our Patreon page discussing what would make a good future episode and asking for people's input. And we had a series of topics it could have been, but the one that came up with the most votes actually was what makes a good dive master. So what makes a good diver? So it ties in with what we were speaking about on the previous episode to a certain extent. So I thought we could talk about that because, we're two dive masters and an instructor sat here around a microphone. Yeah.
So we come in.
Yeah. So I thought we might have something to say on this. We thought we'd go with this. This is something the listeners voted for. It seems reasonable to me. For those of you who haven't come across our Patreon page, you can go to patreon.com/Scuba Confidential. And you can get involved there as well. You can sign up. If you're not a Patreon user, you'd have to go through a kind of a sign-up login process, a bit like if you're using Amazon for the first time. But then you'll be able to see and vote and get involved with a lot more stuff. You can even make a contribution to help us carry on making these episodes of the podcast. Everything is gratefully received, however big or small the contribution. Definitely. And the vote was, as I said, becoming a dive master. What makes a good dive master? Really, becoming a dive master is usually the first professional level achieved within recreational diving. So irrespective to a certain extent of the agency, there are some regional variations if you're talking about CMAS, and they have sort of a star system, 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and so on. You have BZAC, which has slightly different denominations. They have dive leaders as opposed to dive masters. But certainly within NAUI, SSI and PADI, some of the bigger organisations, Dive Master is kind of the first professional level. And it's a sort of multifaceted role that's often misunderstood by non-professional casual observers. I seem to remember many months ago someone asking about the Dive Master course and one of us trying to explain it, the various things that are involved, and the person said, well, I thought it was just swimming around with people following your bubbles.
No, we just look after the rear when we go diving.
Quote of the week.
Quote of the week from Ian looks after people's rears, everyone.
It's true. When we're usually in with students, I'm usually at the back.
Yeah. So one aspect of the Dive Master role is to help supervise students in a training situation. There's chapter 3 of the Dive Master manual where you can do that. Louise in tears over here.
Sounds like one of your dodgy DVDs, Marcus. The Rear Master.
It's on the shelf next to Shaving Private Ryan. Well, I think we'll move on from that. It's a family podcast.
Yeah. We're going to leave that.
We're just going to leave that there. So coming back to the Dive Master course, as we talked about earlier, it's not uncommon during an open water class for students to kind of proudly proclaim that they intend to be a dive master without really understanding everything that's involved with it. And being a great diver and being a great dive master, there is some overlap, but it's not quite the same thing. And there are thousands of dive masters out there. Many only remain active for a little amount of time due to kind of natural attrition. And by that I mean some people pass, and passing your dive master course isn't an automatic card to then get work as a dive master and work on courses. Only the best ones get invited to work on courses or remain working in active status on boats in various parts of the world. And they're then sought out and they become known for being good dive masters. And in fact, on the last episode, we were talking with Jim, and Jim was a dive master till recently. He still is. He's an instructor as well now as well. But he was one of my kind of go-to dive masters who I would try and get in contact with if I was teaching a course locally, because I knew he was very good at what he does. So what are the characteristics of a great dive master if you're considering undertaking dive master training or a new dive master? How can you kind of improve in those key areas. So I'd be interested to know from you guys what you think makes a good dive master.
Well, first off is that they don't jump in with the suit under. Come on, I just had to get that out there. Just get that right out.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go.
An accident, you know.
I don't want to, speak for everybody here, but okay, I will. I've also done that to a certain extent. I was once, when I was a sort of relatively new, I can't remember if I was an instructor or dive master. It's a long time ago. But I was trying to impress a girl by taking her for a dive, and it was a dry suit with a P-zip on.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And I zipped up everything apart from the P-zip. And as I was going around this dive leading...
Awkward.
Hashtag orcs. I was slowly filling up with water. And my buoyancy was slowly going to pot as we went through the dive. So obviously I sort of truncated the dive. It was like an abridged version of a dive. It was like 20 minutes instead of 45 or whatever. We looked back to the shoreline and I remember saying, so let me help you get your fins off and get out of the water. And when she's out of the water, I waited until she was out of the way before I got out, and I filled up my bottom half, made me look like the Michelin Man as I then climbed out of the water with legs 3 times the size. So, you're not the only one who makes these kind of mistakes, Ian. So
because your mind is so focused on everybody else, and you're rushing around trying to get everything done, and it just happened so quick.
It's all right. You don't have to apologise, Ian. It's fine.
But going back to your question.
Yeah. So we'll just have a look at what we think the qualities that make a good dive master.
Empathy. I think empathy is quite a good thing because, like I said earlier, you're changing that mind process where you're just thinking about your own setting up and your own equipment. You're thinking about how is everybody else's equipment? Is that all set? Is that in the right place? Are they feeling anxious and things like that? You're looking at them closely. So I think empathy is to have an element of empathy about you is really important.
Yeah, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and even though you're at the dizzy heights of a dive master, everyone has to learn somewhere, everyone has to start somewhere. So it's, like you say, it's really important to be able to remember that actually this person might be really anxious. So to recognise that is so important. Yeah,
and that was kind of the tell, if you like, for David when he saw you. He saw you exercising those sort of coaching skills and the empathy with people, which is really, really important. And it kind of, when you get to a certain level in your diving, there's not a crossroads, it's not a fork in the road where it's one or the other. But some people tend to go down that technical diving route, and some people tend to go, as I did, a bit more down the kind of coaching and teaching route. And they're very sort of different disciplines in terms of the personal qualities you need. Of course, you need to be a good diver for both. Of course, you need to be meticulous about what you do. And with technical diving, there's clearly less margin for issues. But Ian, you look like you're desperate to say something.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is I think you as a dive master, or can we say DM, is by leading by example as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So make sure you correctly put your gear together, and also just how you are around people and students.
Yeah.
So I try and remember to focus on them and things like that.
Yeah.
But you also, you because they're looking to you, you're that little bit of a bridge between the instructor
for sure
and the students. Because sometimes where the instructors are really busy and they've got a lot of things on their mind, students might think, well, maybe I can't ask them. I'll just quickly ask the dive master or something like that. So I think sometimes we're the bridge between the two.
Yeah, I think a good dive master is always available. I think a good dive master is always, as you guys both said, really empathetic to people. And I think on a previous episode we might have been speaking about this, where it's just being sympathetic to people's level and not going in as the big I am, because then you're going to intimidate people. And as a dive master, as you rightly said, Ian, sometimes you are that sort of conduit between the students and the instructor, where the instructor, whether you're approachable or not, sometimes people put you on a little pedestal and don't want to go, oh, there's a funny noise coming from my gear, or I'm worried about clearing my mask on this next dive, or I'm not sure about my navigation with the compass. And they're more likely, I think, sometimes to approach a dive master. Yeah. So being personable, being approachable, and having the attitude, as Jim said on the previous episode, having a really good attitude is important. For me, I've just sort of broken down, as I was thinking about this, the good qualities into just a series of bullet points, if you like, that I thought we could go over. I don't want to dwell too much on some of them because we've covered some of them on previous podcasts where we've talked in length about, for example, personal fitness and these kind of things. But the first thing that struck me was having a good dive skills and dive knowledge. So at dive master level, you not only must be competent in the water, but diving to demonstration quality. If you're arriving as a dive master and you still struggle to hover, or if your gas consumption is through the roof, then if your skills are out, then you're not going to be useful to an instructor or a dive centre for those kind of things.
Just going back to when I did my dive master, as soon as I started doing dive master weekends training, my air consumption used to be appalling, I have to confess. And literally overnight, as soon as I started doing my dive master training, it improved massively. And now it's actually, I don't like to blow my own trumpet, but it's actually better than the bears.
Oh,
and I
That's
think
controversial.
it's
you've said that on air, you know. We know we're recording this,
quote
don't we?
unquote. But I think it's an attitude and a mental thing. Sometimes, not all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was quite interesting. So you can adjust when you do begin your training.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say, it's good to
Was
have
there
that.
anything you worked on to make that switch?
No, I think it was just kind of almost like a subliminal thing, really. Yeah. I think because my mind was focused on looking after other people and the job in hand, I was just in a different mindset.
Yeah, I think that happens. One of the things for me when I see new dive masters, for example, you can often spot the inexperienced ones or the less experienced ones because they'll be, perhaps we're on a boat in the Red Sea or Thailand or Caribbean, wherever you happen to be in the world, and it's not saying gas consumption is critical to being a good dive master, but if they're still nervous, if they're still a little bit unsure of themselves, they'll still be on a 15-litre tank, even in really simple conditions like that, and chugging through their air a little bit more. Whereas as you relax into it and you gain confidence in what you're doing, as you said, Lou, your gas consumption tends to come down, your focus then moves to other people. But that skill base is really important. And it's not just diving itself, it's all those other bits that go with being a good DM, whether it's deploying an SMB or tying knots, or as an instructor, if we're working together and I'm working with the dive master, I need to know that I can just say, oh, by the way, can you just go and tie that buoy line on for me so that we can use that to conduct a certain skill or make a descent because these particular students will need that as a reference because of the particular conditions that day or whatever it happens to be. So if you're thinking of being a dive master or you are a new dive master, all those peripheral skills as well are things you need to have, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. And I think you don't have the time as an instructor to then teach a dive master some of these basic skills and stuff. So, especially when you've got students around. And it kind of sends the wrong message as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think it's, as a DM, I think it's really important to be up to speed on a lot of the basic skills and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so. You need to know that, just thinking of a basic kind of situation where you might have a situation where I want to, for example, at the conclusion of an open water course, observe the students before I put pen to paper effectively and watch the group from the back. And I might say to a dive master, okay, can you lead this one for me? Because I'd like to observe them just from behind, so I can, at the end of the course, I like to sit with them and just offer them any tips and advice and anything to make their life a little bit easier as they move forward, as they leave me as new divers. And if you've got a dive master who's like, oh, I'm not sure about leading this one, or I'm not very good with the compass, then okay, I appreciate it takes a little while to get to grips with that, but chances are you won't be working with me again. Come back when you are ready, you know.
True.
So that's one aspect of it. We've got the fitness, of course, and we've waxed lyrical on this on several episodes. That's kind of,
it's definitely important.
It's definitely important, and you know, we all work on that. And it's not just about you at this stage as well. It's the important thing to get across. It's not just about personal fitness for you. It's when things go wrong, can you get them out, the people you're working with, can you help them get out of trouble pronto and get them back to shore and execute a rescue as you need to do? And
again, it's all back to leading by example as well.
That's right.
I've shown fitness and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you've got to carry other students' kit and stuff like that.
That's right, yeah. And it's not just the in-water rescue worst case scenario. I think we can all relate to that time where we've all kitted up, we've all done buddy checks and etc., and we've gone down to the water side, wherever we happen to be on the planet, And then one of the students said, "Oh, I've left one of my fins back at the wherever, or my computer's in the cabin, or whatever it happens to be." And guess what? Mr. Divemaster's got to do then. They've got to huff and puff with all their gear on their back to resolve whatever that problem is. And it could be someone's left a bit of equipment. It could be that a mouthpiece they've suddenly realised is chewed through and they need to quickly go and grab one and change it on the fly. There's all these kind of little contingency things and things that can just spin a dive on its head, because that is what keeps things flowing. If you think you've got maybe 4, 5, however many other students you've got who may be baking, or they may be cold, or they may be uncomfortable for whatever reason, or nervous, and if you mess with that rhythm of a training dive, then that can be critical to how they progress. So you want to be able to have someone you can rely on as your dive master to be, okay, I can fix that for you. You look after the students. To be in that mindset.
And from that, you might be asked to then, to get in and either lead the dive or something like that.
Yeah.
Without a break at all.
No, exactly right.
So, you might still be out of puff from grabbing a set of fins and stuff like that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I think it's really important as well, is that, it kind of sends the message as well that fitness is really important for diving.
Yeah.
And I think that does get missed. So I think it's important.
I think it's worthwhile doing. There was I can't remember if it was in the UK or abroad, and there was a dive master who was slightly larger, and they were asking for help getting their fins on. And my view on that is, if you need help getting your fins on, you probably shouldn't be, in a position where you're looking after people, because
that's right.
This is something fundamental. This is something fundamental to helping people.
Well, I was going to say, sorry. Obviously there's a requirement you have to be medicaled in the UK anyway to take divers in the water as a dive master. You have to be signed off by a doctor as medically fit to be able to do that. So building on that and making the effort, it just shows you're making the effort, doesn't it? So like any occupation, you wouldn't become a tennis coach and rock up to the courtside to teach some people tennis with, your tummy hanging out and a dirty shirt on. It's really kind of, like you say, leading by example, isn't it? And it's not, we don't have to be a bunch of ripped Instagram fitness models, but
although we are, obviously.
Naturally, yeah. But yeah, it's just making that effort, isn't it, really? And it's a visual thing, it's a fitness thing, you can react quickly, like you say, to assist people. So it's fundamental in my eyes.
Yeah, I think so. The next, in fitness we've talked about, I think we had a whole episode on dive fitness, which is, anyone who's listening can refer back to that and have a look through the kind of list of all our previous episodes if you're more interested in that. Prioritising safety, I think, is absolutely key. It's important to both the customers and your employers if you're working for a dive centre. In the UK, we do have this culture of what's known in the trade as kind of weekend warriors who'll come in and they've got normal day jobs doing whatever they do, and they come in for the pleasure and the kudos of being a professional at the weekends. But if you're working for a living somewhere, let's say you're in another part of the globe from where you grew up and you're working as a dive master, your employers need to feel that they can trust you in the water with their customers, that you're going to be safe, you're going to take a conservative approach, plan the dive the plan, give the divers you're leading the opportunity to buddy check, brief them carefully on dive parameters, whether it's length of dive or no deco limits, being aware of what the signals are, entry and exit procedures, all these kind of things. You need to feel safe about that and not pushing the envelope. I was speaking with a guy the other night teaching some dive master training about leading divers, and one of the points I got across was, or tried to get across at least, was if someone's qualified to 18 metres or 60 feet, or if they're qualified to 30 metres, 100 feet, that isn't a target. You don't have to use that as like, well, they're qualified to that, so I have to take them there. Use a bit of conservatism. If someone's qualified as an open water diver 2 days ago and they haven't dived since, taking them in the water and immediately taking them to the very edges of their parameters is not a conservative approach to take. Similarly, if there's any question mark over conditions and these kind of things, it's just taking the safer of the two options. If there's an option A or an option B, you'd always go with the safer one, the more conservative one of those two, wherever possible, and planning those dives with the kind of weakest link in mind. So if I had a group of 4 divers, I would expect the dive master to plan to the least confident and least experienced person in that group, not what tends to happen or what can happen in some circumstances, that they'll want to impress the group. So I'll go and do something special, and they'll take them on a dive which pushes the envelope a little bit more, which, you know, sometimes if you've got a group you know well, you can do that, and you can take them not beyond their limits, but to quite close to where they're trained to be, to see something special, whether it's a wreck or a bit of wildlife. But if you don't know them, if they're new to you or there's any question marks, there's taking that more conservative option. And you guys must have seen that, where you've had people perhaps overstep the line and this kind of thing. I had one circumstance where I had I don't want to tell too many stories about it, but
when I was a lad.
Well, in the old days. Now, I remember once working on a boat somewhere, and I had a new dive master on my boat. I think there was a crew of about 3 or 4 professional staff who were working with me, and I was the MI on the boat. And I won't name this guy's name, but I'd given him the open water divers to take diving that day. And have I told this story before in a previous episode?
No, it's just that Ian's tummy's rumbling really loudly.
Is it?
It is, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
We'll probably pick that up. We'll leave that in. I don't think we'll edit that out. Someone somewhere is going to be listening to this in their car, and their subwoofer's going to be going.
It's actually thunder outside.
Is it?
It was, yeah.
It looks fairly sunny from where I'm sitting, Ian, but I'll take your word for it. So yeah, I was working in Asia, and I'd specifically given a group of 4 open water divers to this particular chap to look after. The idea being that you look after the open water ones, these other guys, this other guide, whoever it happened to be, would look after this group. They were using nitrox. You've got the advanced group. I'm teaching this, and we'd kind of split the divers. And I found this guy coming back to board the boat. As he climbed the ladder, I just happened to get a glance at his computer as he was reboarding the boat, because he had a Zoop, quite a sizable display on it. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying 18 metres, it said like 22 or 25 metres, which, you know, okay, there's lots of ways you can look at this, but I'd specifically said that I'd like to abide by these limits, and we've got people you don't know, they're relatively new to diving, and blah, 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 blah. So I warned him about it and said, please just keep within the limits. And the next dive came back, boarding the ladder, 25 metres. And it was like, okay, we've obviously got a misunderstanding here. And what will generally happen is I'm not going to ball out someone in the middle of a boat, because I think that's unprofessional. But it'll just be that guy won't be invited back. Mm. He won't work again on that boat. It will just be a case of, thanks very much. You can pack your gear at the end of today. Put your stuff in a bag, your BCD and regs, and thanks very much.
You're going to lose respect, aren't you?
Exactly right. And I kind of understand why people do that within the industry sometimes, because dive masters aren't paid a great deal of money. A lot of the time they survive on tips. And so they want to show something special to customers. And with him, it was a temptation to show them something that was deeper than they were trained to go. Yeah. But for me, personally, that's not an excuse for taking people into the unknown, because you're compromising them.
End?
Well, yeah, you've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere. Mm-hmm. And besides that, if something did go wrong, let's say something had happened that wasn't good, then I don't know off the top of my head where those particular people stand with their insurances and cover. Exactly. If they then have to be treated for something. Morally, about if they're injured, they've got family, they've got friends back home, all these kind of things. So you're really taking things into your own hands there, which I feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I think you also learn from really experienced instructors as a dive master, especially when you're cutting your teeth in the role.
Yeah.
And I know that was really good for me.
Yeah.
And I managed to buddy up with some good instructors and also different instructors, because rather than just help assist just 1 or 2 instructors, because everybody instruct in different ways and they have different requirements, you know, and I think you learn a lot from spending that time assisting different instructors and seeing how they do things and picking up little bits about what they like and where they want a dive master to be. Sometimes they want a dive master to be behind the students. Sometimes they want to they want the dive masters in front, so you can see the white of the eyes, you know, and that kind of thing. So it's quite interesting actually, and so I think it's a really good way. If we got dive masters who are now coming through, just qualified, I'd definitely recommend that they get involved with some experience, good instructors
Yeah.
to learn from.
I think you're absolutely right, and I don't know how you guys feel about it. I always think you end up becoming this amalgamation of all the different instructors and dive masters that you've worked with and you admire. So you end up cherry picking, or trying to cherry pick the best bits from perhaps how they brief or how they conduct things, and think, well, I'm going to incorporate that, and I'm going to incorporate that, and it's being receptive to that, because we're all learning. I'm still learning. I'm picking up things every time I get in the water. I'm sure we all are.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's being receptive to that. Sometimes you have a situation where people get that dive master qualification. And it's like, well, I'm king of the castle now. I'm finished. I'm the complete article, which of course isn't the case.
I would say I've learned nearly every time I'm on duty as a dive master. I learn something else. I learn something new.
Yeah, it's normally a new word though, isn't it, Ian?
And a new work. Yeah.
You learn and you observe, like you say, and you see different styles of teaching, and you pick up little anecdotes and little kind of gems here and there, and then you kind of fuse it together, and over time, over the months or even years, you kind of make your own professional persona up, without it sounding false. You are performing, aren't you? Every time you teach, every time you conduct a briefing, every time you lead a dive, it is a performance in itself. So it's great to kind of have that kind of persona, that
You just this alter ego.
alter ego. That's right. Yeah.
Alter ego. Where,
Yeah.
and I always say this because when I sometimes have dive master candidates who are a little bit shy when it comes to perhaps doing briefings or standing in front of a group. I mean, it's absolutely key that you find a way of dealing with that, because if you're a qualified dive master and you arrive, perhaps I'm working on a boat somewhere in the world and you arrive with me, I expect to be able to say to you, okay, there's 20 divers here, can you just brief them on the next dive site? If you're cowering in a corner, that's not good for an employer or someone who's managing a team of divers. You need to be confident to do that, and you can find ways around that. You can, like, as you said, Lou, you can find this persona. You kind of go into, well, I'm in dive master mode, and then you can present yourself as that. And it's not you personally, you're playing that role and being a professional for the period of time you're doing it. And then you can come back out of that role. And if you're shy, you can then go back at the end of the day when the customers are gone to sitting in the corner reading a book or whatever it is you prefer to be doing with your time, But it's just being a professional.
And to lead you onto that, to help you, so going back to, we're talking about physical fitness, if you are shy or, if you have anxiety or anything like that, you can then make that effort to not correct it, but to help yourself. So maybe take up mindfulness or, kind of just do breathing exercises, or alternatively, really throw yourself into it and just go straight into it. Right, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Adapt to it and put on that kind of, like you say, that professional persona.
Yeah.
To really kind of, throw yourself into that role.
Yeah. I mean, I've always, like, just personal taste, I've never been a fan of that style of dive master who acts the clown all the time.
No.
Because I think it's one thing making it fun, but if you go over the top and this kind of thing, I think
It's annoying.
there's that element, of course. But also, you're stood in front of a group of people as a dive master saying, I'm going to take you into this alien environment at, 100 feet down. They need to know they feel safe with you and that you are a professional doing it. So I think there's a time and a place for kind of joking around.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm a starchy old guy saying all this.
Usually in the pub afterwards.
Yeah. But I think, playing that role and realising what it is to be a professional is what kind of gets you invited back and gets you more work. Having the equipment for the job's obviously absolutely key. So, and for most instructional systems, there's code for that. There's a code and general standards and procedures for what equipment you'd need. And again, we actually had recently, there was Emily, I think we may have talked about this on the previous episode, but just very, very quickly, with Emily, who's one of the regional managers for Paddy, came up and had a meeting with us recently and was going over how if you're teaching a course, having equipment that mirrors the students is quite important. So there's nothing wrong with, for example, if you want to teach in side mount, but you have to have everyone in side mount. Everyone has to go down that avenue. For me personally, if I'm teaching an open water group, I'll wear a sort of traditional BCD and single tank setup so that you're kind of mirroring what they have, so they don't feel uncomfortable or intimidated. If you're turning up to teach new students and you're wearing a twin set and 4 stage bottles, then they're going to wonder why you've got all this gear that they haven't.
I think you'd be worn out by the end of the day as well.
Yeah. Or if you're preparing as a dive master to take a group in and you've got, say, a CCR, a rebreather, there's obviously like a pre-dive thing with that where you have to go through a period of preparation and pre-breathe on the surface. And that's the exact moment you need to be with your students to look after them, not fettling your own equipment. So it's finding what's appropriate for the environment you're working in and the students and customers you're working with.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple. Take what's appropriate, Having said that, the next thing I had was just expanding your experience in knowledge. One thing I really think makes a good dive master is that ability to be comfortable in all environments. So someone who is only diving in lakes in Europe or in Canada or something like that in a dry suit is going to be well versed in colder temperatures and poorer visibility, but won't have as much experience of current, obviously. Whereas if you're diving in Bali or Komodo, sometimes your mask can get blown off because the current is that severe. So there's different disciplines. If you've got a bit of experience in each different area, that makes it really, really good. And if a dive master who's only dived in Southeast Asia isn't going to be able to cope necessarily with the conditions off the coast of the UK, and someone who's only dived in lakes and quarries around Europe and America and Canada is going to struggle in a ripping current somewhere in Southeast Asia. So it's having that spread of abilities and challenging yourself, and for me, just knowing your limitations and working on what you feel are your weak points. Like as we said earlier, you're this ever-evolving kind of diver as you work your way through, which ties in with the final bit I was going to mention, which is attitude. And for me, that's the sort of the big one. I think, was it Jim who mentioned it on the previous episode when he said number one thing for him with his IDC training was attitude? Yeah. And for me, that's absolutely key. You can be the most skillful diver on that area of the coast, but if your attitude's wrong, you're never going to get work and you're never going to succeed. No. If you turn up with the wrong attitude and that kind of look on your face, like you're owed a favour when you've got students with you.
You've got to be fairly open, haven't you? That's how I see it.
Yeah.
That and I'm trying to be around everybody in my group who I'm with, so I know that they can approach me if they've got a query or feeling a bit anxious. Or anything like that.
That's right. I think it's absolutely right. I mean, the best dive masters for me, that you never have a bad day. You never turn up and not have time for people or not smile. If you're doing a dive, you never have a bad dive. You can have challenging dives and you can have dives where there's bad viz or temperature. But when you with customers, you always, okay, how was your dive? Did you enjoy it? Did you see this? And you always draw something positive from it.
Tying in with attitude, punctuality as well. It's all about being a role model, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's on the first page of the Divemaster manual. Yeah. You don't want to be out, partying the night before and rocking up to the dive centre half an hour late. If you've got customers stood there waiting, they've paid to go on a dive for that particular day. You don't want to be rocking up hungover, cigarette in your mouth, dirty clothes on. It comes back to that image, attitude and role model behaviour. And it's really, like you say, being personable, and as well as being an open person in terms of being friendly and warm and nice, you want to be open-minded. So you want to, like you say, be learning all the time and be willing to learn, rather than get into that, right, I'm a dive master qualification now. Looking at it from a qualification point of view is ridiculous, I think. You don't want to be like, I'm this now, therefore I'm now going to behave this certain way. You're always evolving, you're always learning. And I think open-mindedness, I can't even say it, is really important, because if you're open-minded, you're going to absorb so much more. You're going to be more, adaptable to conditions and situations and people.
Yeah.
Dealing with people is so difficult, and I think a lot of people underestimate it. Until you've worked.
Saying having a thick skin helps.
Absolutely. Having a thick skin, being able to paint on that professional face.
Yeah.
There's going to be times if someone's complaining or they're having a complete meltdown, and you've got to keep smiling. You've got to, kind of keep your chin up and get on with it. Yeah.
And one of the skills for me of a good dive master or instructor, any professional in diving, is being able to read people. For me, that assessment of the diver begins at the moment they walk into the dive centre or climb the ladder down onto the boat, and you're looking for cues from them as to how their experience, how they're feeling that day. Do they look nervous? Asking kind of discreetly kind of questions that will test their knowledge as to whether they're ready to make the dives they're about to do with you. And it's a little bit like a game of poker where you start to know little tells and traits with divers that give you information as you gather experience. Because no two divers are the same, and it's just trying to work out, okay, where do they fit in? How can I best deal with this person so they have a safe and enjoyable experience with me?
I think that's actually being a dive master is actually a really nice role to have.
Yeah.
I think it's obviously we don't have the final say in things, and there's actually a nice part to it actually that but you also that cog in the process to make sure that things do go well, that people are safe.
Yeah.
And, that people have a nice dive as well. So I think it's actually I enjoy it. I think it's a really nice role to be as part of a club.
I think so. And instructors really value good dive masters. They're like gold dust because the ones who are really, really good.
We can charge.
Are you not getting paid, Ian? But no, the best ones do tend to, after a period, when they feel they've gathered enough experience, move on. And I always feel this double-edged thing. It's a bit like when we had Jim on the previous episode, or Elia, or Matt, or any of the guys who've DM'd with me in the past. If they then make that stride to being an instructor, that means I'm really pleased for them, but I've then perhaps have lost a really good dive master who I know I can trust in the water with me or on land to deal with students and customers and these kind of things. So it's a double-edged thing with that kind of thing. Just quickly tying in with that punctuality thing that Louise talked about. I think the best dive masters understand they're part of that larger team and they're representing not just themselves anymore. They're representing the instructor they work with, the dive centre, the agency they're with. Is part of a much bigger picture. And that preparation for dealing with those customers, as you said, Lou, begins well before they get in the water. So as an example, if we're teaching locally, when we teach in the evenings, generally it's customers are advised a kind of 6 p.m. kick-off for whatever class we happen to be involved with that particular evening. I would expect the dive master to be there 5:15, 5:30 and making sure everything is in place, whether it's filling tanks or documentation and that their equipment is functioning and ready to go. You need to be always one step ahead, and I think that shows in a good dive master as well.
Yeah, tying in with attitude and having that public persona on, really. Your behaviour and your attitude not only reflects on yourself, but like you say, it's reflecting on the dive centre. And if your attitude is off that particular day, that customer will complain or they'll tell their friends. So the reputation of that dive centre could potentially be affected by your attitude and your behaviour and how you conduct yourself with the customer. Yeah,
I mean, we live in this strange world of social media and TripAdvisor and all these kind of things. And I can't remember the stats for it, but I think people have a good experience. They tell X number of people. And if they have a bad experience, they tell like double the amount or something ridiculous. I think I heard that somewhere. Don't quote me on it. 12
or something like that, I think I was once told.
Yeah.
Bad experience. Because one person will tell half a dozen people that something bad happened. And then those people will tell their friends that something really bad, or they heard that something really bad happened. So it really does spiral out.
Yeah. So I think if you can give people a good experience and win their trust and that kind of thing, it really helps.
Yeah.
And the only final thing I'd kind of scribbled down to say within that is that ability to communicate with honesty and integrity to the customers and the other, sort of other staff members you're working with, knowing that they can rely on you, that they know that you're part of a team and you're going to help them as much as they help you, and you're all paddling the boat in the same direction, so to speak. And I think that's really, really important. But yeah, that attitude thing is overriding for me. That's absolutely key. And the best dive masters, as you know, then always get invited back and you want to work with them again and again. Have you guys got anything more to say about being a dive master? We've sort of gone on about it for quite a while now, actually.
I think, like you say, just getting back to that attitude thing, it's all to do with attitude and how you can read people, how you interact with people. And it's not just in the water, it's on the surface as well. And even when you're, in inverted commas, off duty, you want to be the guy or the girl that everyone gravitates towards. And without sounding kind of egotistical, it's nice to be thought of that way, isn't it? You don't want customers to turn up for the second dive of the day thinking, oh no, I hope he's not or she's not leading me. You want to be the person that is popular And whilst it's not a popularity contest, it's nice to be liked. It's nice to be respected by your peers and other dive masters and instructors.
I'd agree with that.
On a serious note, a good pair of sunglasses helps. So when you so you look pretty cool when you're having the photographs afterwards.
Of course.
All the gear.
Absolutely. It's all on social media, you know.
First rule of diving, never hold your breath.
Think about your Instagram.
Yeah. Second rule of diving, Ian wants to look good for his photos on Instagram.
And Tinder.
Okay. I think that's probably a good moment to wrap it up.
Moving on.
Yeah, I think we'll end it there. All that's left to say is, we haven't covered everything about being a good dive master. There's a whole course and it's really multifaceted, but hopefully that just gives you an overview of kind of the qualities we think, at least, and it's just our opinion, that we think make a good dive master.
It is a really good role. And if anybody take anything from this, that they're thinking about possibly doing it, it is a really good role.
Yeah, I think so too. If you're thinking about doing it, do go into it with your eyes open. Do think about those qualities and have a proper discussion with your instructor before you commit to it, because there is quite a lot to it.
A nice way to approach even considering doing your dive master is to write a list. So I'm a fan of lists. So maybe just sit down, pen and paper, write a list of what you're confident with in terms of diving and you as a person, and then what you feel you need to develop on or work on. So, and look at that list and really kind of go in with an honest opinion of yourself as well. And if there's particular things that you really want to spend time on, whether it's in the pool or how you communicate with people or just kind of getting up to speed with the regulations involved and how to process paperwork and things like that, maybe shadow a fellow instructor, kind of, just off the record, and make sure you're ready to be a dive master, because it's not just another diving course.
Well, because good to talk about that course. That course does make you focus on a lot of different things. So your diving skills, your fitness, things like that. So that is a good course.
Yeah, I think it is an eye opener sometimes. It's this within that. We've talked for quite long enough, really. Just one final thing. There's a little anecdote of things that I find I've taught a lot of dive masters over the years. Normally that first skill circuit, and a skill circuit, for those who aren't aware of it in dive master training, is performing within the PADI system, at least, the 24 core skills of an open water course to demonstration quality. And the number of times over the dozens of dive masters I've taught over the years where I've got them in for that first skill circuit and said, okay, can you perform a 5-point descent? And they've just looked at me blankly, or they've done it incorrectly, is unbelievable. So if you are thinking of doing it, that preparation is absolutely key, and just being ready for what's ahead, and that's what makes anticipate and provide. That's what makes a good dive master.
I'm getting flashbacks to my first skill circuit with you, Marcus.
Oh, really? You're going to need some therapy after this, eh?
I think you did afterwards.
Pulling his hair out.
Too late for that, Ian. Right, we're definitely ending now. So thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon on Scuba Confidential.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Scuba Confidential. We really appreciate you tuning in today. We'd like to clarify that we're in no way affiliated with any agency or organisation. All opinions expressed during this podcast are our own. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at ScubaConfident1, Instagram and Facebook at Scuba Confidential, and if you'd like to support us via Patreon, go to patreon.com/Scuba Confidential. Any contribution is really appreciated. Additionally, if you have any suggestions for topics or discussions, just let us know at scubaconfidential@gmail.com. Many thanks to Plunkett Music for the groovy tunes, and we'll catch up next time. Until then, keep diving.